Hello and welcome to On Air. Today we are going to be speaking with Rami Shapiro, Chris Grosso, and Jane Galloway on Beyond Recovery, the 12-Step Revolution. I'm your host, Kate Sheehan Roach, and it's such a great honor to be with these three tremendous writers, teachers, speakers, really leaders in their field. So I'm deeply honored to be speaking with them. And I'd like to briefly introduce each of them before we get into our roundtable discussion of this topic, this idea of what lies beyond recovery. First, Jane Galloway. Jane is a Renaissance woman. She has over 30 years experience with the 12 steps. She's an ordained minister in the African Methodist Church. She holds master's and doctoral degrees from Claremont School of Theology. She's a certified drug and alcohol counselor, and she's founded and led several nonprofit organizations in support of the arts and arts education. She herself, you may recognize from her career in film and stage acting. She's been on Broadway. She's been a star in Hollywood and on television, but she's brought it all together recently in her latest book called The Gateways, which I'm sure we'll be talking quite a bit about. We'll lead into that later. Next, we have Rami Shapiro, another Renaissance man here who has written over 24 books on religion and spirituality. The one we'll be talking about mostly today is Recovery, the Sacred Art, the 12 Steps as a Spiritual Practice. Rami's been a professor of world religions. He has served as a congregational rabbi for over 20 years. He's received his rabbinical ordination from Hebrew Union College and his PhD from Union Graduate School. He's also an award-winning poet, a musician, a columnist for Spirituality and Health magazine, and his latest project, which I hope to talk about a little bit, is what we call the World Wisdom Bible, which is a long-awaited volume of all the world's scriptures in one bound volume. Wow. Says a lot about where we're headed in this conversation. And finally, we have Chris Grosso, who is really the up-and-coming writer. He has 2 books out right now, The Indie Spiritualist, a no-bullshit exploration of spirituality. We're going to talk about both bullshit and spirituality with Chris. And Everything Mind, which is subtitled What I've Learned About Hard Knocks, Spiritual Awakening, and the Mind-Blowing Truth of It All. I understand Chris has a very recent contract on a book that he's going to call Dead Set on Living. So he's not only a great writer, he's a spiritual director, a musician, a public speaker, and he hosts his own podcast at the Be Here Now Network in association with his spiritual teacher, the great Ram Dass. So this is just the beginning for Chris. He speaks for the Gen X and millennial perspective, radically honest about his, he's popular in the skateboard and punk rock scene that he's a part of. So together we cover the gamut here. We're quite a diverse group here. A lot of talent in our midst. I'd love to go around and have each of us introduce ourselves a bit. And if you don't mind, I'd love to start myself because I'm not only your host today, but I'm actually part of this conversation. I am a grateful member of Al-Anon, which is a 12-step program founded by and for family and friends of people who've been affected by addiction. So this is a deep honor for me to be a part of a panel that I very much relate to. Today marks a big anniversary for me, actually. This is the day 12 years ago that I learned my beloved niece Melanie had died using heroin. So I come to you with a heart broken open by this thing we call addiction. But I also come into this conversation with 8 years experience in Al-Anon, for which I am deeply grateful. The gifts of this program are many, and we're going to talk about those a lot today. So with that said, we have another big anniversary today that I'm excited to announce, starting with Jane Galloway. I'd love for you to introduce yourself, Jane, in the context of your day. What is special about today for you, Jane?
Well, I got up this morning and, one of the great things about the 12-step programs is that we live a day at a time. So I don't know what time everybody got up. The first, person getting up today, I guess, is the one who's clean the longest. I don't, this is my anniversary within the 12-step program of which I'm a part. So that's a special day for me. This is the day I attended my first real meeting. I had gone a few months earlier, but it didn't stick. So that's what today is. But I'm happy to be here today for this conversation.
Well, I celebrate with you and I celebrate you, Jane. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
How about the others? Rami, will you introduce yourself in the context of your recovery?
Sure. Well, I've woke up this morning at 2:30 in the morning with a dog face in my face.
You win.
And I've been up all day with a sick dog.
Oh.
I don't usually count my recovery days, months, years. My issue is food, and I continue to eat. So it's every day I find myself walking sort of a tightrope because I have to eat and I don't want to overeat. So I haven't eaten what we call trigger foods, certain things that I know just send me over the edge. I haven't done that in a very, very long time. But I did eat today. So today is is I guess you could say the first day or the only day that matters because I haven't overeaten yet.
Thanks, Rami. How about you, Chris? Welcome, and please introduce yourself.
Well, thank you, Kate, and congratulations, Jane. And
thank you.
So far.
But I'm so glad that Jane and Rami went before me because actually I was a little nervous, Kate, when you were saying earlier that this is how you wanted to start because I really don't count my time either. I woke up this morning and I wasn't going through withdrawals. I wasn't, having anxiety about how I was going to scrape together money to get high today. And so for that, I'm very grateful. And much like Rami too, part of the reason I don't count or I stopped counting a while ago is that I might not be picking up drugs or alcohol today, but I too will sometimes act out with food. And some days are better than others. Some lengths of time are better than others. But to me, it's like, well, I'm sober from this for a while, but I am acting out with food in the same exact way that I used to with drugs and alcohol. So it's tough for me to count. And some people might say semantics, but for me, I'm just grateful that today, like I said, I woke up feeling good, minus this flu I'm getting over, but that's a sickness. I can live with that. But anyway, so I am very grateful to be a healthier version of Chris today than I have in many years past. So thanks for having me on today.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you all. It is such a pleasure to be with you, and celebrating and commemorating and recognizing, in Al-Anon, our problem is with our thinking. So I got to think, but I'd say, we fall off the wagon about 6 times an hour or 60, depending on how you look at it. So yeah, we're all humbled here. We're definitely humbled in our daily awareness of where we are, but we're part of a larger conversation right now. The fact that all 4 of us are willing to sit here and be transparent in whether it's alcohol or food or drugs or the very thoughts in our head. There's so many other types of addiction that are just a part of our culture. It's just who we are as human beings, really. And nothing says that more clearly than just in the past month or so. The Surgeon General released a first time ever report on substance abuse. How did we come this far without a report on substance abuse? First of all, that's one question. But kudos to Vivek Murthy for talking about this, not just talking about it, but really presenting a call to action, an urgent call to better understand and treat addiction. He himself said, "It's a disease of the brain, not a character flaw," in his reference to addiction. So we're gonna explore that a little bit. But indeed, from the extreme of death to physical death to all the other impacts that addiction can have on us. This is obviously something that is part of our time. 2016 is about time to get serious about this. So thank you all for coming, for all the writing that you've done and the work that you do that puts yourself right out there on the front of this. The statistics are devastating. We're looking at the actual number was 47,055 deaths to addiction in 2014. 2015, 27 million Americans reported taking illegal drugs or abusing prescription drugs, and 66 million people admitted to binge drinking. But then there's, we have to look at other issues of gambling, shopping, or over shopping, workaholism, stealing, cutting, overeating. There's really no end to it, to the possibilities of what we humans can fall into in addiction. But I was curious to talk with you, each of you, about not so much about addiction, but about recovery. That's the foundation of where we sit, is in a culture that is rife with addiction. But here we are, the four of us in recovery, and that's really what I want to focus on today. This uncanny experience of liberation that we've had, not only from the specific addiction that brought us here, but from a whole variety of things that could rob us of our joy and of our freedom to live. I see my recovery as a passageway that I've been given into a life that I never would have known about had I not experienced the impact of addiction in my family and in my own being. So I say I'm a grateful member of Al-Anon. On the first day I wandered into an Al-Anon meeting, if you had told me that I'd be sitting here saying I'm grateful for this, I would have sent you to NA. I'd say you're on something, because there's no way I'm going to be grateful that I was subjected to the things I've been subjected to in my life. But you know what? I absolutely am. And that is uncanny. And that's where I'd like to begin. I'd like to just go around the table here. We're at a virtual round table, as if we're, in each other's living room together. I can see there's a puppy dog behind Jane that I'd love to snuggle right there. We're all together. Someone else is woofing here. We've all got our warm cozies here, but we're together in more ways than one. But tell me, let's start with Rami. Tell me about this notion of gratitude and what that means to you. And are you grateful to be in this program?
Oh, absolutely. I first got exposed to 12-step. A friend of mine was going to a meeting, and I really just was curious. What's it about? We went to an AA meeting, and I said, I don't want to lie, but so how do I qualify? And she said, well, just say you don't know if you're an alcoholic. So we went around, and I introduced myself, and I said, I don't know if I'm an alcoholic, which was a trigger to everyone in the room saying, well, he's in denial, so he must be an alcoholic. And I, what I loved about being there was these were among the most honest, forthright people I'd ever met. And afterwards, I said to my friend, this is really wonderful. It's too bad I'm not an alcoholic. I'd like to do this on a regular basis. And she said, well, you have your own problem. But I said, no, I don't have a problem. I'm not addicted to anything. And then she said, food. And then I really went into denial. When I went to my first OA meeting, humbled is sort of a mild way of putting it. I was flabbergasted when I heard the people's stories and realized they were telling my story. There was nothing they were doing, no matter how bizarre it seemed, that I thought, well, wait, I do that. Isn't that normal? And I'm so grateful for finding out that what I thought was normal is actually nuts. So I'm very happy to be in program. But I think it goes beyond, and we can talk about this later, but for me, it goes way beyond food. And that's where my true gratitude comes. I think, just in a nutshell, that 12-step is not simply a spiritual practice for the 21st century, but among the few very important, authentic spiritual practices. It fits the bill for our time, I think.
Absolutely. Thank you, Rami. And you've written so beautifully about that. I'm going to do this. each time one of you speaks, I can share this book. I can't keep it because I keep giving it away, and I see it in meetings. I see it places, and even though we're supposed to just stick to the conference approved literature, well, Rami's crossed that line. But talking about beyond the specific substance or behavior that we're addicted to, there's a baseline addictive tendency that you cover beautifully. We'll talk more about that. Wonderful. How about you, Chris? Are you grateful for all that you've been through?
I was actually talking with a friend last night about that, and they say when you're in meetings, try to leave a lot of the wreckage of our past out of it, or leave the mess out of the message. And I get that, but I was really, having a pretty deep heart conversation with a friend last night and sharing just kind of the tip of the iceberg of some of the terrible things that I've gone through in my life. We all have gone through in our lives, I'm guessing if you struggled with drugs and alcohol. And I realized in that moment, and I've realized this before, but it was very, very clear to me last night that I am grateful for all that I had gone through, because it has brought me to this place where I am today, where I can sit in that hell with other people and hold space for them when the need be. Maybe I don't have the exact words to pull them out of it, but just being there in that place of raw vulnerability, of pain, of hurt, and opening, my heart and meeting them there. It's not easy, but it's a gift. And I definitely am humbled and grateful for that. Aside from, of course, the fact, like I said earlier, I'm grateful I woke up and I wasn't sweating this morning, the withdrawals weren't kicking, and that's huge, so it's hard for me to lose sight of that when seemingly, when things that might irk other people come up in my life, not to say that they don't still irk me, but I find that having gone through all I've gone through, it really puts into perspective, what matters in life today. Again, some days are better than others, but I'm super, super grateful for that. And if I can just share one really quick, because I love giving audience takeaways, a really quick practice. There's 1,000,001 great gratitude practices out there, but I really love this one. And I do it in the evening. You can do it anytime during the day, but I do it in the evening when I'm going to bed, because I find it also doubles helping me fall asleep. And it's just, you simply go through each letter of the alphabet, and for each letter you name something you're grateful for. And that's it. So like A, apples. I like the taste of apples. B, bluegrass music. I'm a fan of that. C, and on and on and on. That's and cool. It's just, so it's ending your day on a note of gratitude and appreciation for life. Or you can start your day, or you can do it both. But anyways, I just wanted to share that, so the audience has a little something they can utilize if it resonates for them.
So Chris, I got to ask, what's X?
X is so usually I'm asleep before I get to X.
Xylophone.
I love the xylophone.
All right, keep it clean. Keep it clean.
X-ray machines. Thank you for those. Fair enough.
That's good. Excellent. Well, thank you, Chris. And how generous. That's the thing I've noticed. Rami mentioned that, when he first went to 12-step meetings, he saw how, incredibly honest people were. I've also seen how incredibly generous people are, that the overflow of this program is to always have something you want to share with others. And Chris did a lot of that in his first book, The Indie Spiritualist. And wow. I mean, you've really spelled it out for us, what you've been through and how it has impacted you, and what you've been able to see through that. And it beautifully written, beautifully done. But one thing that you reminded me of as you were sharing just now about how with your friend you were recognizing what pain you've been through. I remember reading in your book where you talked about learning to hold your pain the way a mother holds a crying newborn baby.
Yeah.
What a beautiful image, Chris. I mean,
I have to give credit where due, and that was inspired by Thich Nhat Hanh, the beautiful Vietnamese monk, and I heard him reference that in a Dharma talk he was giving. But I did take and kind of create a practice out of it. But I'll never forget when I heard that, and I was driving, just like a bell went off, and my heart just kind of was like, wow, very beautiful.
Well, it applied very very poignantly in your book because you've been so clear about the pain. You're not trying to hide it. You're sharing it. Same with you, Jane. I mean, Jane's book, hot off the presses. I'm sorry, I've got all my. You can tell I've been spending some time with the gateways with all of my my Post-it notes because this is one you have to keep coming back to. But Jane has written a practice book that also tells her story. And again, the vulnerability, that being transparent and beautifully written descriptions of what you've been through and where it's brought you and how it shapes you. But tell me about your gratitude, Jane. I know I've read about it, but tell us now.
You know, it's interesting. Someone the other day, a good friend, said she called me very kind of teary and had just read the beginning of the book and said, you know, I'm so moved by your vulnerability. And the thing is, it's very second nature to me. It's so much easier for me to tell the truth than to try to lie and remember what I said about anything. So it's funny, there's only one chapter in this book of the whole big Gateways that talks about my story. I mean, and yet I think we live in a culture where people don't really talk in that open way so much. Everybody's got their angle and their PR angle and their, you know. So I am grateful for the relief of just being able to be myself. You know, so what came to mind as I was hearing both of you guys talk, and Kate, you as well. A memory came to mind, so I'm just going to share it. My father was in AA, and he was, as I share, you know, my dad had a massive heart attack in the hospital standing on his head. I mean, he was a yoga guy too. So, you know, what a way to go. But I mean, he was also pretty type A. But I grew up around a sober person, and I watched him change from, you know, a little rocky when he was, I was a little girl, to my spiritual teacher. I mean, my parents are divorced. He was sending me psycho-cybernetics when I was 12 years old. And I remember hearing my mother say, no, Eddie, she's reading it. She's really reading it. So, I mean, I was trying to decipher this stuff, but he really had some sense of urgency about teaching me these things because he died when I was 16, which was devastating for me. So, but my dad was he spoke all over the place in AA and 12-step, a lot of people. And I loved AA. I mean, so I thought it was the coolest thing, but I had no idea it had anything to do with me. But I remember at my dad's funeral, which was, I mean, you know, every family gathering, when you come from a family like mine, I'll speak for myself, has the potential to be big drama. And so this was, you know, no exception. And it was a sudden death, so nobody had been able to prepare their self-presentation. So it was just chaotic and very tough for me. But I remember standing in line as people came to greet me, this 16-year-old kid who had lost her touchstone to sanity, quite frankly. And this group of people came up. There were like 6 of them. I will never forget. It was as though the Red Sea parted and some sane, beautiful, compassionate, available people walked in. And a woman approached me and said, Janie, we are your dad's friends from the 4922 Club or whatever. This was in St. Louis. They called it by the name of the building. And she said, how are you? We want you to know we're here for you. And I have never forgotten that moment of these people. This was the only moment of clarity. It was literally like another dimension was open to me. So I had no clue that I was going to have the opportunity to join into that other dimension. But I just remembered it as I heard you all talking. Wow, I'm so grateful that for whatever reason, I was able to stop trying to medicate my despair and depression and all of it. Grief, really, a lot of grief, and come into this bright, open other world. And really, I had my first experience and really only experience as a young person of that veil lifting and this group of, I don't know, angels, other beings, evolved souls, kind people, available people, something. So how cool. I mean, I'm grateful to be part of that Fellowship of the Spirit. And I have no idea why I was so fortunate as to be called, pulled, whatever, into that reality. Because literally the day before I ended up getting sober, you could have told me that I would be beginning this long journey the next day. But I mean, I would have thought that was very odd and unlikely.
Well, Jane, you have officially done it. I'm throwing away the notes because as you were speaking, I was really struck. Before you started talking about the dimension, I started thinking about the big book. And because you're, that intensity of your dad being in NAA, you're at the funeral, for goodness sakes, and these angels come out all I could start thinking about was a phrase I had read in the big book that I don't know what it means. So I'm asking you, I'm throwing my notes away of the things I know about, and I'm going with you three, where Bill W., or the founders, whoever wrote this amazing book we call the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, the fourth dimension. This is what really opens up when we enter into the 12 steps. We can talk about our sobriety. We can talk about, regaining sanity. We can talk about, the ways our life has improved. We're not having the shakes. We're not having the, the compulsions, whatever. But okay, we could talk about that for a while. But what I really want to talk about is what's beyond that. That fourth dimension that Bill W. talked about, that maybe he didn't even know what he was talking about. But here we are all these years later. That was 1938 or something like that. Am I right? Somewhere around there. And now we're, all these years later, all this wisdom with you three. I'm going to jump to Rami. I'm gonna put Rami on the spot and ask him what if anything is beyond this whole thing. What's the next dimension?
Well, it seems to me the next dimension comes with the realization that you're not in control. But it's a different kind of not being in control than in the other dimensions, if you like. So to me, the various addictions are all symptoms of something deeper. And the deeper is, in the big book, he says, the first thing you have to do is stop playing God. And to me, that means stop trying to control things. The way we try to control our lives is by trying to control everyone around our lives. And when that doesn't work, then we self-medicate the fact that we're not, we can't control things. And in my case, it was through food. But the fourth dimension is when I realize you can't control it. Not simply is my life uncontrollable, but reality is uncontrollable. And as long as I no longer try to control it through some, addictive behavior or something else, as long as I don't try to control it, there is a grace that comes from knowing it's not controllable. I don't know if this makes any sense, but there's a grace that comes with that. And that to me is this fourth dimension. It's where freedom actually resides. And I think you said this earlier, Kate, but it may have been someone else, so I apologize. But something about, the freedom that comes with this. I think that many people are fundamentally terrified of being free. Mm. Eric Fromm called it back in the 60s, I guess, or maybe earlier, escape from freedom. And we just don't want to be free. We don't want the responsibility. We don't want the uncertainty and all of that. So I think the fourth dimension is giving up the no longer trying to escape from freedom, but allowing the grace of freedom to transform us.
Beautifully said. I want to hear what Chris has to say. I know what he has. I know what I've read, but what does freedom mean to you? And this whole concept of the fourth dimension.
Yeah, well, Rami beautifully already stated much of what I would have said myself. Learning to lay Chris aside as best I can on any given day, not being in control. Now, I wake up and each morning I set the intention and I say a prayer asking for spirit, and you can use whatever word you like in that case, Godhead, Brahman, Buddha mind, Christ consciousness, whatever. But I ask spirit, will say, to help me lay myself aside as much as possible so that this vessel that is Chris will act more as like a faucet through which the water of love and compassion and service and wisdom flows through. May I show up and help wherever I can, however I can. 5-10 seconds later, I'm often right back in that driver's seat, but the intention is there. And more throughout the day, I come back to remembering that, and I come back to the moment, and I see the ways that it's showing up. Okay, you asked for it. Here it is. Here's an email. Here's a phone call. Here's an invitation to a detox to go speak at. Are you going to do the work? And absolutely, I am. And so really doing my best to really lay that control aside. And for me, part of that has been exploring a lot of the non-dual wisdom traditions. And going that route as well. And something as simple as, for example, I close my eyes, my eyes open up. Am I Chris doing the seeing, or is seeing just happening right now through these eyes? Am I in control of that seeing, or is there seeing that's just happening? What I'm hearing, when I'm hearing, you, Kate, speak, am I Chris doing the hearing, or is there simply hearing happening? Is the hearing, the hearer, and the heard really three separate movements, or is it all just one movement of life, of Leela, Hinduism would call it, the dance, lifing, this beautiful unfolding? And I don't mean to get like overly esoteric about it, but these are, this is what comes up for me when I think of control and laying that control aside and just, trying to taste, or not even trying to, allowing that fourth dimension to kind of unfold however it will in the experience of Chris Grasso on a daily given basis. So, and that's on a good day. Let me just say that's on a good day. There's plenty of not good days. So, but that's something I like to try to keep in the forefront of my aspirations and intentions each day.
Thanks. And well, it strikes me, Chris, that what you're saying is paradoxical, that in setting aside Chris, you really become Chris. That's who you are. I mean, is that not true? I mean, it's a Christian concept to lose yourself and be found, but it's not just Christian, it's Hindu, it's Buddhist. You talk about how the world's religions reflect this reality, but is that paradox isn't lost on you?
No, life is a paradox. It's all, it's all a contradiction. But that's what I love about it. 1 second it makes perfect sense and in the most absurd kind of way, and the next second it's gone. For me, again, it's all contradictory. It's all paradoxical, and trying to make sense of it, especially in our minds, for me at least, that's where I ran into the most trouble. I very much was stuck up here and still sometimes am, but making that journey from here to here, that's been a big part of my path and my practice, and trying to live more from this space, or combining, the heart mind. Pema Chodron will often call that, or other Buddhist teachers, but she was the first one I heard reference it as the heart mind, place of equanimity and compassion and kindness and discernment. So not throwing out the intellect, but learning to really integrate the two. That's been a big part for me. But there's going to be a big contradiction often between the two. So, yeah.
I think of, we're not going to go through each of the 12 steps today. Obviously, that would be, we could do this in a 12-week series if we want to do that. But I think of the prayer and meditation step of step 11 and how that journey from head to heart, is connected there, and how that's something I want to talk more about. And it's something you've all written about, but Jane in particular has written about how spiritual practices taken from the world's religions, various religions and thought systems have helped her, deepen her 12-step recovery. And I want to ask you, Jane, about that. Building on what Chris has just said from his spiritual path. You've written a book that is actually pointing to specific practices from the world's traditions that help deepen recovery. Can you talk about that a little, Jane?
Well, if you don't mind, I will, but I would really like to pick up on what Rami was talking about, this idea of fear of freedom. First, if you just for a second,
Sure, absolutely.
What came to mind as that immediately as that was being raised was, I think we're ultimately more afraid of dying. And so if we're free, we're also in that free floating place of dying unto oneself daily, or which is a Jesus statement. But I have worked in hospice for years. And one of the reasons I have done that is because I realized early on in my recovery that I had chronic unresolved grief from my entire life, but certainly from specific losses. And hospice is one of the places where people actually live in the fourth dimension. You talk about no bullshit spirituality. People really don't, unless they're in terrible denial, and it's uncommon, really. I mean, people really get into a state of, I don't care about all this other stuff, what ultimate issues and ultimate concerns begin to become really what people are dealing with. And so I have found that I'm really more comfortable with people who aren't fake, and people who aren't asking all these issues about changing the deck chairs on the Titanic. However, practices, I think, center us. And they're all spiritual traditions that I have studied. And certainly I'm excited to read this book of the Bible of wisdom traditions. This will be a huge addition to a conversation about tolerance in our world, because there are still so many people who don't want to have that conversation at all within all of the various isms. But the practices center us in the moment and give us great, the ability to be wherever we are, to be here now, which is, of course, Ram Dass's great thing. So I would say, I'll tell you why I wrote the book with the practices. I have been the pastor of two different communities, one for 11 years and another for 4 years, one in LA, one in New York City. And I was really trying I was evolving into trying to be an interspiritual minister. Now, yes, I'm ordained in a Christian denomination, an African-American Christian denomination. So little non-traditional there for me. But I was ultimately trying to lead a conversation about an interspiritual walk. That is not easy. People really want to know, ultimately, is there a there? What are we doing here? And so finally, really, one of my members in New York said, look, you can teach so many things. We need to know what works for you. And I said, oh, well, that's easy. It's the 12 steps plus all of these other practices and tools I've used over the years to keep me sane and continually moving forward. So she said, write that. We need that. So that's really why I wrote that. And I wrote the practices because I think they could be a great template for an attempt to create some sort of interspiritual community with the 12 steps almost as a spine, a non-doctrinaire spine. So I think whatever, Yogananda said, pick a path, any path, and go deeper. And I really think that's the deal. It's the going deeper. People skate outside of the rim of the glass so often, and the beginning of every path is much more different than the actual depth practice of the path once you get down there. This is why I love Matthew Fox's One River, Many Wells. All of these different wells, Shinto, Islam, Judaism, Christianity, all of the wells have very different bells and whistles and doctrines and histories about them. But once we get to that river, maybe that's the fourth dimension, but that's the place where we are one. And that's what I'm really always looking for, is where is that place that you and I are one, that real namaste reality. I'm hoping that we're in a period where what is emerging of all this assertion of differentness and oppositional kind of stuff in the world is really a precursor to a blowing apart of all that. I hope that's what's going on. I'm choosing to think of it that way.
Well, that's perfect, Jane. I really, you're leading me right to where I want to go with this conversation, because what I see, and not only with my own eyes and my own experience, but thanks to you three, is that, the 12-step program, like I said, in and of themselves, they're wonderful. They help people. But in the grand scheme of our time, what this interspiritual era that you're talking about, this idea beyond tolerance, we're not just tolerating one another, we're actually experiencing one another's practices and breaking down the barriers. That's the goal in my heart. The 12 steps were sort of the original, well, I wouldn't say original, but an early interspiritual practice. The founders wanted to make this available to as many people as possible. So they tried to keep the language as inclusive as possible. We're still working on the gender issue, but we'll get there. But the idea of a higher power as opposed to God or Krishna, or we're not going to name the God. We're just going to recognize the power involved. The idea was to include as many people as possible. But what we're looking at now, I think, is a movement that is really the vanguard of interspirituality. I do a lot of work in interspiritual circles, and I'm sitting there all the time thinking, when I get to my meeting on Wednesday, I'll see this in action, or I'll be able to, really, these are the people, these humble, broken people are the ones that are actually ahead of the curve. Now, if you were referring to Rami's next project with the World Wisdom Bible, I want to ask you about that, Rami, and how that, obviously your work is tied to the perennial wisdom and tied to your Judaism, but your 12-step work is all interwoven there. And I wonder what your thoughts are on how the 12 steps fit into this interspiritual age.
Right. So what I hinted at earlier was that I think 12-step is a powerful spiritual practice for this time. But when you go into it deeply, maybe not but, and when you go into it deeply, and Chris was talking about this a little bit ago, I think you get beyond the notion of the one, you get to the none, None. When Chris says, who, I forgot how you put it exactly, and was sort of Ramana Maharshi kind of questioning, self-inquiry. But if you ask yourself, who knows I have an addiction? Does the I that knows I have an addiction have an addiction? And I think the discovery is it doesn't. Mm-hmm. That there's a part of me that is addicted, but that's just sort of small expression of the true nature of what I am. And that is something else. So what I would like to see happen is that we go beyond this notion of spirituality as a way to be healthier as an ego, it does that too. I'm not knocking it, but I think it's the true freedom is to realize you're not who you think you are. Yes. And that takes us beyond this egoic notion. In the perennial wisdom, and the perennial wisdom is the core of my philosophy now, my whole approach to everything now. I'm interested in Judaism, Christianity, Hinduism, Buddhism, Islam, all the rest, but only when they're only from the perennial perspective. I get bored very quickly with the parochial, and I'm much more interested in the perennial. And the perennial is very simple. It's got 4 points. One is everything is a manifesting of a single reality. Call it what you will. Number 2, humans, and maybe not only humans, but humans have an innate capacity to realize this. But you don't need religion. You don't need, it's built in. You need practice, but just to sort of wake you up to what you already know. Number 3, when you have that awakening, it comes with an ethic. It comes with a morality. When I realize we're all manifestations of the same reality, I can only love you. I can't do any harm. And the 4th thing is, this is why we're on the planet. This is the highest calling that humans can respond to, this awakening and the ethics that comes with it. So you mentioned the World Wisdom Bible really quick. World Wisdom Bible is an attempt to offer an alternative to Gideon. So the whole idea is we put together a collection of perennial texts from 7 different traditions. And it's being published by Turner Publishing, having nothing to do with Turner Broadcasting, different company.
Thank God.
And the book comes out in February, and while Turner hopes to sell them in Barnes and Noble and online, the One River Foundation that produced the Bible that I lead and that is behind the Bible Project, our goal is to give the books away. Wherever you find a Gideon Bible, we would like someone to go and slip a copy of the World Wisdom Bible next to it. Not secretively. We'd like to get permission from the hotel in different places.
Cool.
But we're trying to give them away. So we're offering them free to institutions that will put them in next to in retreat centers, next to beds in hotel rooms and hospital beds and hospital rooms, etc. So I think that 12-step is a practice that really takes us beyond religion, maybe even beyond spirituality, to a direct realization of who you are when you aren't caught up in who you think you are.
Or aren't. You're saying the no.
Yeah, right.
Oh, we aren't. Yeah. Instead of finding ourselves, we're going to find nothing.
The Buddhists talk about the not self, the no self.
Right.
The whole thing.
Right. Well, and it's no coincidence that we all, laugh and smile at this because we've experienced it. I'm thinking of I got to go to Chris here with Everything Mind, because even just telling us what the title of your book is about, this builds right on what Rami was saying in terms of, what lies beyond religion and beyond spirituality. How does this tie in with your program, Chris?
Well, yeah, I mean, Everything Mind, it's basically the same as Buddhism's saying of no mind, or big mind. Spirit imbues literally everything, at least in my experience and in the direct experience that Rami was talking about, to the place where there is no more Chris left, and it's not that I live in that reality like someone like Ramana Maharshi did, but I've had many tastes of that. Ken Wilber calls it one taste. It's just where you're in that place, there literally is nothing else but that. Ram Dass has a wonderful mantra. He says, I am loving awareness. I am loving awareness. And those aren't just pretty words. That is a true, direct experience of the embodiment of what underlies who we think we are. And, spiritual practices are wonderful. They're grounding. I would never, I share many of them in my books. But at the end of the day, practices like self-inquiry from Ramana Maharshi or direct pointing, those to me kind of root it out. Whereas the other stuff is almost a Band-Aid at times. This gets you right to the core of what the situation really is. Who really has this addiction? What's really going on? Who am I? Am I using these practices to spiritualize my ego? Or am I using them in a way that I'm, peeling away the layers, that I'm getting to the root of who I truly am? So going back to Everything Mind, it really considers all things, everything that comes up in our lives as part of the spiritual path. The good, the bad, it all is. It's, as Rami said with the perennial philosophy, it all manifests from this one source, and it is all divinely connected to this one source. So learning to see the one, capital O, in the many, in the many, in the one. It's I have to keep coming back and prefacing that, though, by saying, on a good day, these things happen, because I in no way, it's so important for me to be totally transparent. And these are good days for me, or not even good days, good moments of good days that these things happen.
So Chris, let me just jump in for a second.
Yes, please.
Even the bad days are the one.
Exactly. That's
no alternative.
100% it. And that, again, Everything Mind, it all is what it is in every moment of every day, no matter what. There's nothing else.
So I've got to say that while this is all great, and I certainly agree and resonate with a lot of what you're saying, when I hear you say there's no Chris left, if I have a lens, and I do, it's always been sociological. And so I look at the macro and I look at cultures, and I've done that as an actor. I've done it as a minister. I mean, it's just, I've had a lot of professions and expressions of what I do, but I've always had the same interests. And I wanted to share earlier, too, there's a wonderful book by Ann Wilson Schaaf called When Society Becomes an Addict. So it's tough to be an unaddicted person in an addicted culture, and she came out with that book 30 years ago. So that's a sociological view of, what are we trying to join here by going back? But from a woman's perspective, we are being asked to disappear all the time, especially after a certain age, but not even after a certain age. I was a baby feminist when I first moved to New York, and Gloria Steinem was my idol, etc. But I only had some experience of watching my mother struggle with being a very gifted professional in a world that didn't want to hear her voice and tried to cram her into too many conventional roles. So my experience really was hers. Maybe you're observing hers or not wanting to have hers. But the more I've been alive, I don't think there's a mistake that we've gone from a certain kind of sizing to having the general aspiration of many teenage girls to be a size 0. To be a size 0 and to walk on shoes that are utterly, it's really an act of gymnastics, of whatever it is, to walk on a heel this tall. But, it's not that far from foot binding. So women are being asked to disappear all the time. And so the woman's spiritual walk in many ways is to not disappear, is to have a voice, is to be a participant in the dialogue. And I'm noticing everybody who's being quoted is a man, is a male spiritual path, Pema Chodron, and she's, wonderful. But aside from that, I haven't heard too many women quoted. And
Jane, particularly in the 12 steps, Jane, I really appreciate that you're really one of the few women writing in the 12 steps, and even 12-step literature is, like I mentioned, in the context of language, can be, the original alcoholics were all men.
Well, it was written by men for men. And so the thing is that I really think that because of my experience with my dad, I just loved AA and I loved AA people. And so I've always been so happy to be around the 12-step program. So I know a lot of women, though, who don't have that relationship to what they see, something that was created from outside. It's interesting. My computer's propped up on 2 books here to be the right level. One is by the Deirdre Bayer biography of Simone de Beauvoir, and the other one is O'Keeffe and Stieglitz. I have had to search to find women who have lived the life of the intellect, who have also lived a life of attempting independence of the spirit within a culture that has really not allowed that for themselves. Madonna just came out with a very strong statement to Billboard magazine, who's giving her, an award. And she said, if you're giving me an award for anything, I'll tell you, what is the award for? Just not disappearing? Because that's what women are asked to do. And so as a woman thought leader or a spiritual leader, I have really been so interested in how the people have got ideas about who they want to hear wisdom come through. Well, it's not classically women.
I appreciate that, and I also appreciate
something I have an issue with.
What I'm seeing here, and the depth of conversation that we're having here, we can touch upon the idea that it's really the divine feminine that we're talking about. It's not necessarily maleness or femaleness, although you and I are female and Rami and Chris are male. I would say from knowing them, they are as much conduits of the divine feminine as you and I are. And I'd love to give each of them a chance to respond.
The only way, I just wanted to add one thing. Yes, but that's why I describe this by saying my lens is sociological, because the divine feminine is a cosmic idea, but we live in an embodied state. And so we are always having to mediate that paradox, Chris, as you raised earlier. So,
yeah. Well, Chris, will you respond in your experience as a spiritual leader, and you're dealing with, addiction doesn't care whether we're male or female, and nor does recovery, but what's been your experience?
Well, obviously, not being a woman, I can't speak from that perspective. I absolutely adore Sally Kempton and her work around the divine feminine and Sri Anandamayama, and that there's plenty of female teachers that have been very deeply impactful in my life, and many of them I suggest in both of my books. And the end, I have suggested reading titles. So the fact that I haven't quoted many women, I've only quoted a couple of people, but it's just, it didn't come up in context for me. I deeply respect and appreciate what Jane's saying. The one thing I would say is, in the Buddhist teachings, there is the absolute and the relative. The absolute referencing that unmanifest, going back to the perennial philosophy, everything is as it is, almost a quantum soup of potential energy before it manifests into this physical reality, which is the relative, and that takes shape in male and female perspectives, the yin and the yang. To me, of course, that to negate that we have these roles that we're playing, that's a form of spiritual bypassing, which I am no fan of. I don't advocate for that in a heartbeat. There's a writer, and sorry to quote a man, his name is Jeff Brown, a dear friend and a great writer. And I love, he wrote, although it's true, and this might not be verbatim, but he said something to the effect of, although it's true that we are spiritual beings having a human experience, it is also just as true that we are human beings having a human experience. So that is so important not to lose sight of, because again, I feel like that is where the spiritual bypassing can come into play in whatever shape or form that may take, whether it is negating, the role of masculine or male or feminine. And of course, as we know, males embody the divine feminine just as females embody the masculine qualities as well. So that's, I don't know, my 2 cents, but I would really love to hear what Rami, has to share on that too.
Well, I agree with everything Chris said, but I don't want to lose what Jane said, because not only is 12-step written by men for men, religion is written by men for men.
Thank you.
So there's a deep need on that sociological level. There's a deep need, or what Chris called the relative world. There's a deep need to reclaim women's voices. And in Judaism, we now have, not in Orthodoxy, but in conservative and Reconstructionist, Reform, Humanist, we have women rabbis. But that's not it, it seems to me. That is a great improvement sociologically. But the real challenge is not to have women commenting on the men's texts, but to really reimagine the texts so that we don't have this bias anymore. And that, I think, we're just, if we are just, that's going to be just beginning to do. My own, God as I understand God is the divine mother. So my own experience is with the divine feminine. But that, without getting into the weeds, that isn't the highest level of consciousness within the Jewish system. We have 5 levels. That's number 4, where there's this I-thou relationship with the divine. But this 5th level is when the none, the no one, the no mind. What I'd be interested in hearing from Jane as an actress. Now, I just thought of this when you were talking.
Yeah.
But as an actress, so you play all these roles.
Right.
And you can play men and you can play women. It's just an act.
Absolutely.
Who's playing Jane?
Right. So good question. Here's you mean when I'm being an actress or in
right
life?
Now.
Right now, who's playing Jane? Good question.
That's what Chris is talking about, right?
Yeah, I understand.
That's exactly what I'm talking about. Yeah.
I understand.
I think it's official. We have gone beyond recovery right now. We're beyond the weeds. I knew you guys would bring us here.
Well, I think the thing is that without a me, and I've done a great deal of work with people who are victims, and I hate to even use the word victim, but of domestic violence. Without a me, there is no me to not be.
Exactly.
Beautifully said, Jane. You've all said so many beautiful things. This really ought to be a beginning. I think we have to, I've got assignments for you all. Jane, you're going to have to rewrite all the AA literature,
Great.
Rami,
let's move on. I want to talk about rewriting the religious literature.
Well, that's Rami's job. I've got Rami on that.
One thing about this, because I was thinking about this. People are so intrigued with my acting career. My brother recently found a bunch of stills from a pilot I starred in at the Ed Sullivan. He was sending them to me, and people were saying, do you ever think of going back into acting? I'm not thinking of going back into anything, including yesterday. I mean, I'm so amazed that I'm progressing. But I'm always so interested. I've been a minister for 25 years, really, truly. I mean, I acted in the middle there. There was crossover. But first of all, I've never stopped acting. I mean, it's a skill. It's a transferable skill or whatever. But the other thing is, I started thinking about this. I was always playing. I mean, I can't remember a play I've done that was written by a woman. One, I did at the Mark Taper Forum. One play written by a woman. So for my whole career, I did a lot of television. I did a lot of commercials. I did a lot of work and a lot of stage work. All parts written by men through the male gaze, directed by men. And so now that's really interesting, because coming out of that, being in this other thing where people also now dare me to be talking for God. I mean, how dare you? And then start all these projections about how dare you be talking about God to me as a woman. It's really been interesting to sort of reflect upon the fact that people are more comfortable with me impersonating whoever that was, that cute, perky, whatever that person was I had to be to make a living. And I made a living as an actor, a pretty good living for a lot of years. And in order to make a living, you have to somehow learn what they want you to be. And
I want to come back around to what Rami said in the context here of playing God. You are the expert thespian among us, but what Rami's saying is our underlying problem is that we're all thespians. We all want.
No, I got it. I got it.
And so breaking that down, I think, is what is truly what we're talking about here today. We do need to start wrapping up, but I do think this is the beginning for four of us. So we've got more work to do. But I really want to wrap up with an appreciation for each of you, and knowing that you each have a flock that you tend. And I hope that we're able to share this conversation with each of your flocks, whether it's through your specific program, whether it's to people who are still in the throes of addiction. That's why we're here. We're not here just to talk to one another. We're here because there's an audience that needs to hear what is synthesized when we come together. Something new happens here, and I'm thrilled with how much each of you brings. This is huge gratitude from me. And but I wanted to give each of you just a sign off. We don't have a lot of time, but just a 1 minute to address your flock and send them off and let them know what you're up to. If there's a way they can follow you, if there's a way they can support you. This is we'll just run from Chris, Rami, and Jane, starting with Chris.
All right. Well, very quickly, I will just share a very brief story regarding flock. I don't think I have one. I speak to a younger generation, but I get lots of messages from cross-cultural generations. It's beautiful, different ages. And what made that apparently clear to me, and my work needs to reach out to everybody, I can't just narrow it down, is when I was speaking with Father Thomas Keating, wonderful Trappist monk. And I mentioned him, this is like 5 or 6 years ago, that I was in recovery from drugs and alcohol. And Father Keating, in his beautiful 80-year-old old man way, laughed a gentle, playful laugh at me and was like, well, I'm in recovery too, but I'm in recovery from the human condition. And when he said that, it made me realize that the work I'm here to do far surpasses just those that struggle with drugs and alcohol, far surpasses just those that are 18 to 40. So I appreciate and am honored and humbled to work with all beings that are in recovery, which is to say humanity as a whole. And people, they can just connect with me at theindiespiritualist.com and check out books and workshops and all that jazz there. Thank you for this platform, Kate.
Oh, thank you so much, Chris. How about you, Rami?
First, we should update Father Thomas is now in his 90s.
In 94? I think he just had his 94th.
Yeah. I saw him just a couple of months ago, and he's still in recovery now from being Thomas. He's preparing to die by letting go as much of Thomas as possible. Someone told me the other day that I have gone out of my way to avoid having any students. So I don't really have a flock. But, I do have the One River Foundation and the World Wisdom Bible Project and something called the Holy Rascal Project, where we really learn how to blow religion up. So I would just say if people are interested in what I'm doing, you have to wait till next month when the new website is up, but it'll be oneriverfoundation.org.
And we'll be looking for the World Wisdom Bible in
February.
In
it comes out.
Westerns all over the place. Every hospitals, hotels. Where else? Where can we help with this?
Anyone who wants to see the Bibles throughout the world, we've got, right now we have 95 interfaith groups around the planet who are waiting for the Bibles to come out and waiting for me to find the money to buy them and send them. So I'm always looking for help doing that. And then on the last weekend in March at the Scarrett Bennett Center here in Nashville, we're having a weekend retreat to sort of roll the Bible out and get people excited about it.
Well, I'm excited. Thank you so much, Rami. What an honor to
my pleasure.
Hear from you and speak with you.
My pleasure to listen to all of you.
Thank you. And Jane, you have the gateways, opening up the gateway. We hear people talk about gateway drugs as if they're a gateway down to destruction. You've opened up a new gateway. Tell us about your work.
Well, I see each step as a gateway into a different level of consciousness, of awareness. And so almost like locks, there's things where ships go higher, higher, or lower, lower, whatever. So each step is combined in the gateways with many interspiritual tools and levels of consciousness. I see the 12 steps as a developmental model, much like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, Erik Erikson's 8 Ages of Man, etc., along with the Kabbalah, Sephirot. All of these things are really developmental models. And I've created one that I think is accessible to people who are interested in really kind of almost having a trapdoor at step 11 to allow for step 11 to really expand rather than just say, sought through prayer and meditation, then let people find their own way into 5 minutes later saying, having had a spiritual awakening. It's like, wait, when did that happen? Really looking for a spiritual awakening that lasts for a long time and gives many, many options from an interspiritual bento box. Really the core of my work. First of all, I just finished my website, so I really do want to plug it.
JaneGalloway.com. All right, we will see you there.
My new best friend who's in Bangladesh, and I kid you not, this was a totally global manifest. It was a great experience. So my new website is JaneGalloway.com, and I recommend people go there. It's not the complete representation of all my work, but certainly of the gateways it is. And,
right.
And really what I'm about, and this is how I've evolved, is to really be about the sacred role of the artist. And I have developed an organization called Tribe, which I think gets at the essence of what I and many of my fellow travelers look for in spiritual community: transformation, realization, inspiration, belonging, and expression. And so there is tribealive.org. And that's a work in progress all the time. But I really view the world from the perspective of the artist. And I honestly feel like artists are going to save us if anybody's going to. And I'm usually not into that savior kind of language, but at this moment in time, I think we kind of need a perspective that's going to give us something that will save us. So it's the perspective, really the view of the artist. I want to thank both of you guys for this dialogue and for your work. I think it's fantastic and exciting, and it's been great talking with you. And Kate, as always, just wonderful.
Thank you, Jane. And I can see Emma's waking up there. Wake up, Emma. She's waving her little paw at us. That must mean it's time to go. Waving bye. Thank you so much, Jane. And thank you, Rami and Chris. What an honor it is to be with you. Until next time, this is Kate Sheehan Roach signing off on air. Good night.
Night.